Hey yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the TJTV podcast, only on Spotify and Google. How is everyone doing today? Personally, it is not a good day. I just watched the Phillies lose, and yeah, so we're going to start off with a low note right there. They lost to the Mets, and they're officially out. And it's like every sports team in Philadelphia, we make it to the playoffs and then we choke. And unfortunately, that's what we have to look forward to for the next few months until April of 2025. Well, really March of 2025 when they go to Clearwater. If that whole hurricane ever, if it doesn't take out Florida personally, but that's a different story for a different day. But hey, I have an interview coming up with Andre Joseph. He was on the show a few months ago, and he's actually promoting his new movie, The Last Vendetta, which is coming out on November 9th. So we're going to chat with him in just a few moments. So here's what we're going to do. Let's take a quick break. I'll be back, and then we'll record from there. So yeah, TJTV podcast only on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor.fm, and A3 Media. All right, let's take a quick break. I'll be back with Andre Joseph. All right. All right, I'm here with Andre Joseph, who is promoting The Last Vendetta, which comes out on the 9th of November. And he was on the show like 3, 4 months ago, correct?
Yeah, earlier in the year.
Yeah. So how have you been? It's been a long time. What have you been up to lately besides The Last Vendetta?
I've been up to quite a bit. Still trying to plug my previous movie, Dismissal Time. We just recently played at the Down East Flick Fest in North Carolina, and we actually won the Founders Award there since our film is dealing with a social subject. So that was a really good feeling to have, and made a lot of nice contacts with young people in the area as well as aspiring filmmakers. And we actually also have another music video, actually a music video that I did last year called Sleep Until Noon, that's going to be playing at the New York Long Island Film Festival this month. Making arounds with our job and, with The Last Vendetta, just pushing that. And just working on a lot of different ideas. Really just been having my hands full this year.
And the Last Vendetta is part of a trilogy, right?
Yeah, so it actually began in 2009 when we started shooting Dishonorable Vendetta. And that was an indie film that was along the lines of Miami Vice and Lethal Weapon, dealing with these two drug enforcement agents, Keith Miller and Jason Stokes. And Miller, in particular, has a very troubled history that little by little, over the course of the trilogy, starts to surface. And his partner and his boss, they're pretty much in the dark about it. So that tends to be like the tension that goes on as they're investigating different cases, dealing with drug dealers, and even in the second movie, Vendetta Games, we're up against the like corrupt casino security team, and this new film is sort of like the culmination of what we set up in the original is now, kind of coming back to haunt everybody.
Do you believe that trilogies can kind of be like a flop? Because I know, like with certain trilogies, like Scream 3, personally, I wasn't a fan of that movie. And a lot of the movies that have trilogies, it's either a hit or miss. Like for example, John Wick was a great movie, but if you look at like another like movie with like let's say Halloween 3, for example, it wasn't that good of a movie. I mean, at least in other people's opinions. But well, what about you? What's your feeling on that?
It's an excellent question because I feel trilogies tend to work best when there's actually like a laid out plan right from the beginning. Something like Lord of the Rings, for example. Now I know that's a larger book that J.R. Tolkien created, but having Peter Jackson film all three movies pretty much within the same time frame and for it to be as consistent as it was, you saw the results of it. And by the time you got to Return of the King, not only did you have a satisfying conclusion, but it really did feel like a victory for the overall vision of what a lot of filmmakers had failed to conceive, and he was able to pull it off. Whereas in other cases, like the original Star Wars trilogy, people tend to forget that George Lucas had his ideas for what he wanted the series to be, but over time, he made changes based on just the audience reaction and how much merchandise was selling. So, he tinkered with things, but he still kind of stayed the course with his overall vision. Whereas, like with Disney, they didn't have a plan. They just pretty much said, we're doing this one movie, then every director's going to have their own take. And that was the wrong way to go because you could see how it sort of uh, polarized the audiences and the fan base. So trilogies could usually go a lot of different ways, and it tends like by the third movie, people kind of get fatigued, or the story kind of gets lost in certain places. But fortunately for us, we tried to avoid that as much as possible. We wanted something that felt organic to these characters that we created to make sure that they had a proper conclusion.
Was it always was the trilogy always planned, or was it just something that, like, let's just play it by ear type deal?
When I did Dishonorable Vendetta, that was coming off of a time where I was just like, I want to do something dark, and I want to do something that's kind of in the action genre, but I also want to make sure I have my stamp on it. So, in the beginning, when I wrote the script, I wasn't thinking of sequels. Then maybe as we were getting into midway through shooting the first film, I liked the rapport that I had with my co-star Chris Carula, and I really loved the rapport I had with J.R. Carter, who plays my boss Marks. And so I started to see possibilities of where we could go with it. And at least I saw there was a part two that we could do. And then I guess towards the end, we were all kind of like sitting around saying this should definitely be a trilogy. We should definitely have this thing done in such a way that it could be like our Lethal Weapon or Dirty Harry or something. Just like it could be a series. I mean, I wasn't going to go beyond this one, but definitely I knew we were going to have to like maybe address certain things as like the audience started to build up, particularly from the second movie when it came out on Tubi, that we wanted to really go back to certain things to kind of like get people to see the first film again, and then have both events of those movies pay off here.
Now, when it comes to writing a script or working on a dark movie, personally for me, I did a scripted series on YouTube called Pandemic, loosely based off of COVID, but it was also based off of I Am Legend. As I was writing and acting in my own personal bubble, I felt like very depressed because it's a dark move and it's something I'd never done before. It's something like, I had to visualize end of the world, there's nobody outside, it's just me. How did you feel when it came to writing and directing and acting and all that in a movie like that?
Yeah, each film was very different. Like the first movie, I was definitely in a relatively dark place that, you go back and I'm even shocked like how violent I got with the action scenes and, some sexuality in there. And there's some heavy duty stuff that I kind of hadn't done before. And I think I was trying to channel Paul Verhoeven or one of these guys that really like they go the extra mile when they do an action movie. And then with each one, I started to kind of dial it back as I became a little bit more mature and responsible. But tackling dark elements such as you know corruption within the DEA, FBI, or just law enforcement in general, plus the drug element. You know, I I have friends that are cops and retired NYPD who tell me all these stories, and they tell me about, how sometimes it takes a toll on their personal lives. So I try to, sort of antidote what they tell me based on their own experiences, and I try to implement that through those characters because I didn't want to just make this like Bad Boys or something where everything is so heightened and the characters are supposed to be super cool that they're almost flawless. Like I wanted characters that have their demons or have their fears and trepidations, because I think anybody that's in law enforcement has to feel that on a daily basis. The notion of trying to make it through the day, to get home to your family, or just to, simply solve the case and keep the bad guys off the street. And yet there's politics that sometimes are involved. There's all sorts of things that, the ramifications of it all, that I always like to explore, that little middle ground, that little gray area that a lot of good TV shows tend to do, but I feel like you don't see it enough in movies. So that was something I was trying to achieve here.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. So I also read that like a lot of actors, when they want to study a role, they'll either go to like say like a psych ward or a prison, just and put themselves in their shoes just to see what a prisoner is feeling, or they'll go on a ride along with a cop, for example, see how like the cops do their job. And what about you? You said you talked to police officers. Did you ever do anything like that though? Like go in on a ride along or just hang out with a cop for a day?
Never did the ride-alongs, but I have hung with police officers on, at least like for a couple of hours and just to see what they do. I never saw any action. I never saw anything too crazy, but you know, I would see the routine stuff, and then they would tell me their stories about different cases that they were on or situations that they've been in, and sometimes really heavy duty stuff that can actually be psychologically damaging to witness. So that's why, for all that's out there politically, and I do sympathize with the both sides of it all, I can see the perspective sometimes of how dealing with such disturbing things on the streets that we cannot see because we have a media that's very sanitized. I could see why these guys sometimes have to go to counseling and deal with these issues. And there was even, like, I remember there was a scene in the second movie where my character is supposed to go deep undercover. So the last night before he's supposed to go in, he has this heated argument with his wife. And I remember um, an actor that I work with who's retired in YPD was telling me about a situation he had been in where he had been like not spending enough time at home and having to be consumed by a particular case he was on and really having to go all out. Like literally, this is somebody that never really lashes out against their loved one, but in this case, he did, and it was so out of character for him. So I kind of channeled that in that particular scene, and that kind of got me to the psyche of what these guys have to deal with regularly when they're at home and have to confront their wife or their child.
And I know some cops are just tired of like the ramifications of what they got to deal with, like shootings, murders, uh, whatever. And a lot of I know someone, my friend, his dad was a cop. He retired. He said, "I can't do this anymore. It's too psychologically, mentally, not mentally, like it's too soul sucking." And he quit. And he's been the happiest since he left the police force because he didn't like dealing with it, all of it.
Well, it's funny you mention that because that's kind of what's happening in The Last Vendetta, because you have the three central characters, Miller, Stokes, and Marks, who are all pretty much, at least two out of three are in a transition point. So, basically, our boss Marks, he just got picked to be the drug czar of the country by the president in the president's office. So he has to go through a confirmation process, and because of that, he has to choose a successor for his post in the DEA. And my character, he's getting a little older. He's been at this for a while. And he's starting to think about maybe stepping back from the streets, maybe working behind a desk, and maybe even doing some teaching just so he could feel safer going home to his family every night rather than, doing the latest drug bust. But then you have Miller, who never got over the death of his wife and has just been kind of going through the motions with every case, trying to find some kind of redemption, but never seems to find that satisfaction that allows him to proceed with his life. So he's kind of stuck in a box. And a particular character kind of comes into our lives that affects all of what's happening with us. And in some ways forces us to have to like confront our history in order for us to move on, and for others it's a way to somehow maybe to not only confront the past but maybe to find some happiness in the future. So you have a lot of different dynamics going on in the way that these characters end up, and their conflicts starting to really come to the surface as their secrets begin to unfold.
Do you believe that, like in sequels, such as the second movie, the third movie, killing off recurring characters or minor characters is a good move?
Very good question. So that could go a number of different ways. I feel that um, if it serves the story right, yeah, it absolutely can work. And sometimes it even raises the stakes even more if you take a character that's beloved that you think is untouchable, and you take that character out in a shocking manner, then that makes everybody else vulnerable. You don't know who's going to go down. Um, I mean, people love or hate the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The thing I liked about Endgame was that you didn't know who was really going to go. You're constantly questioning, as you're seeing this, that there's going to have to be somebody that's going to make a sacrifice here, and to see the characters that ultimately do that, yeah, it breaks your heart, but it makes sense from a narrative perspective if you go back into those other movies before that and see where they started and where they ended up. um, it absolutely can be effective, especially if you're at the end and you're not particularly worried about, uh, you know, low box office results or something like that. But no, it's got to serve the story if it's done the right way.
It's kind of like with Stranger Things. I remember reading something from the Duffer Brothers. They were saying, you think Hopper's safe or Steve's safe or whoever else is beloved safe. They're not safe. They're like, there's this is the last season. We want to go out with a bang, and don't don't count on so and so being alive or dead. They were pretty much like teasing like these characters can die. It's just like a matter of if or when or are they going to do it.
Yeah, and especially on that show, to start out with the whole like Goonies meets ET vibe and the innocence of it in the beginning, you could tell from that last season that it's going in a whole different direction that is so dark and pretty much at the summer blockbuster level that obviously if you're going to end it, yeah, there's going to have to be some significant deaths because I can't see them suddenly like say, hey, let's do a sixth season and it's the 1990s. No, end it right here. Somebody's got to go. And I have my guesses, but again, it's got to serve the story.
Who are your guesses in that for the upcoming season?
Uh, my opinion, I think 11's definitely going to go.
Yep.
You know, I listen, I adore Millie Bobby Brown, but you can kind of tell from certain interviews that she wants to be done with it. I mean, she loves the show, she loves the character, but I think she's just ready to move on. And, whatever they have to do to kind of close the book on her seems to make sense. I don't think Sadie Six character, I think, will end up surviving, but one of the kids is going to go. And I can't really say who because I'm still trying to. I feel like it's not going to be the obvious choice. It's not going to be Will or anyone else that you think, oh, because they're vulnerable, that they're going to be the one to bite the dust. It's going to be like the Eddie Munson situation. It's going to be a popular character that you just don't see coming.
Yeah, I mean, oh man, I'll never forget when that first season or the fourth season came out. My wife and I watched, I think, because it came in two parts. We watched the first like few episodes one night, then the last few the next night, and then the second part came out. And I think each episode was like over 2 hours,
Mhm.
and we stayed up and watched the whole thing. And that last episode was like the worst episode to watch because I was like bawling my eyes. It was so horrible. Like I even come across that scene on YouTube and I just watch it and I'm just like, why am I want to cry watching this. I'm an emotional guy.
Yeah, I mean, when characters like that connect so well with the audience, especially if it was even intended to be that way, it has that effect. I mean, the Barb character in season one, everybody thought, oh, she's gonna come back somehow. No, they've kept her dead all this time, and I'm kind of applauding that they're brave enough to do that because other shows would find some way to undo that situation because they could see dollar signs.
Yeah, well, did you think Lost did that? But I mean, when it came to Lost killing off characters, they would always come back like a season later, but for one or two episodes, and then the final season they all came back. Spoiler, you never saw it, but do you think that's a bad move on their part?
It can be, yeah. I mean, not that I've really watched Lost, but I've heard all the horror stories with, all the undoings of those deaths, and basically, once it got to its conclusion, people were kind of disappointed by it. Um, I mean, I would say the equivalent for me with that was with Dexter, and the fact that the original series didn't end on the right note. Then they tried to bring it back, and people still weren't satisfied with the ending, even though the way it was set up, it did make sense for the story. And now, apparently, not only do you have this prequel series coming out, but they're planning to do a continuation, and they're being vague about whether or not he's dead or alive. If you've seen New Blood, and it's like, guys, come on, what the train's got to stop at some point. It's getting ridiculous with how far you could stretch this.
What were your? Did you ever see Breaking Bad?
I haven't seen every episode. One day I got to binge the whole thing.
I mean, I feel like that was a perfect ending for both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul and Alchemy. I won't spoil it, but I feel like it did right by the ending that they chose in the show. But Walking Dead is a whole different ballgame, though. That's all over the place.
Yeah, that's just never ending.
It's just weird. Like your zombies can't really run, and you could probably kill like maybe 10 to 20, maybe a 30 to that like a day just to like get rid of them all. But it's just like a never ending cycle. I feel like.
Yeah, it's just like a lot of these IPs, and I was having a discussion with this with my friend the other day. There's this constant amount of, we have this story, we have something that's working with the formula, and we don't want to end it so soon. And they're trying to milk it through prequels and sequels and spin-offs. And I think it just does more to dilute what made that project special, as opposed to, actually making it more interesting in terms of expansion. So, something like Walking Dead, for example, was great when it first started, those first couple of years where it was a water cooler conversation every week. But now it's become so stale because there's no surprises, and it's just, the same routine every week. And yet, there's still a fan base, but it's just dropped off. The thing about it is that, where's the shock value? Where's the surprises? At a certain point, you kind of run out of that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when it was a big show, but as like movies and TV shows, like I feel like it's wrong to do more than 5 seasons or 5 movies of a series, just because if you just do 11 seasons, like Supernatural, for example, they ran 15 seasons. It kind of got stale towards the end, and I dropped off after I think season 12, and I just watched the last 5 minutes of the series finale just because I'm like, I don't want to watch the next like 25 episodes of the next few seasons just to catch up. It was stupid to me.
Yeah, I think you're on the money with 5 seasons or 5 movies, and then you don't go very far. Um, it's especially with movies, like some of the stuff that I've talked about, like say with Dirty Harry or Rambo. Usually by the fourth or fifth movie, everything starts to become a parody of a parody, and the actors begin to age out, which makes it more sillier. And in the case of TV shows, yeah, like if it's something really innovative in the beginning, like an Empire or a Miami Vice or something like that, it just right out the gate, it's red hot because it captures a trend. Usually, you have a good 3 seasons where people are going to be talking about it and watching it every week, and then usually by the fourth or fifth year is when the whole thing gets stale. There's no more surprises. Everybody starts to kind of phone it in, and they want to move on. And yeah, then it's just like, okay, by the fifth year, we got to call it quits. Um, and that's the way I think sometimes some of these things should be. When you have shows and movies that go on beyond that, like look at Fast and the Furious, how many freaking movies there have been now, like 10,
Yeah,
and it's got the point where they've gone to space. It's gotten ridiculous, and they still make money, but it's the kind of money that only if you check your brain out the door and you just don't care. That's the only way to really enjoy it. Otherwise, I'm like, but this used to be street racing and $20 million budget. Now it's like almost $1 billion, and we're doing like sci-fi level stuff with the cars.
that so funny story about that. When I was in college, I took a I forget it was something about media. It was media and television in college, and my teacher was a big Fast and Furious fan. She was like, "I can't wait for when they go up to space." And now, we however I when did I graduate? 27. So yeah, 2017, and now we're in 2024. So like 7 years ago, she called it.
Mhm. Wouldn't be far off if they start adding dinosaurs and time travel.
Yeah, no, that's a new idea. Now someone's going to listen to that and then implement that. Vin Diesel goes back in time. I could see that.
Yeah, because I mean, that's another example, by the way, of like constantly having to stretch out the plot just so you could implement more characters and more story. Like the one with John Cena, where it's like, oh, Dom had a brother that nobody knew about, and he's a bad guy, then he turns into a good guy. And there's that aspect of it as well, where like you establish a villain in one movie, but then the next movie they become his friend. And it's like now there's no surprise because we're just following a formula that just never changes and there's no stakes. And even if they're characters that supposedly get killed off, they're going to be brought back like 8 movies later because they're more popular.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing with Pixar. I feel like Pixar keeps making more sequels to certain, like Toy Story. They have a Toy Story 5 coming out.
Yeah.
Why it should have ended after 3 with Bonnie getting Woody, Buzz, Jesse, and all the other ones. Like you didn't have to have Toy Story 4. You didn't have to have a fifth one. But I feel like with them, I feel like they're trying to capture the new generation's perspective or their viewership, I guess, because it's been however many years. I'm 29. It's been 29 years, almost 30 years that Toy Story came out. So they're trying to get kids today to figure out, okay, let's watch 1 through 4, and then when the fifth one comes out, we'll know what's going on. That's what I feel like Pixar is trying to capture.
Yeah, I mean that perfectly makes sense. Although, and I agree with you, Toy Story 3 should have definitely been the last one because I think it ended on the perfect note of passing the torch to the next generation and just leave it at that. You don't have to say anything more about what happens with the toys. But the problem with Hollywood is there's always the sense that there's always a way to continue to make money as long as the franchise is successful. And sometimes it's about stretching the plot, or sometimes it's figuratively putting the gun in the writer's head and saying, if you don't do it, we'll get somebody else who will. And then they feel pressured to preserve the legacy of the characters that they created. So you end up in those situations where you get a sequel that doesn't feel like an organic continuation, but just more or less a cash in, just an excuse to just get these characters out. Like, for example, the recent Matrix movie that was on HBO Max, it did not need to be made. And granted, the second and third movies were not living up to the hype. Even I was disappointed with the third one. So the fourth one, I was just like, I'll check it out. Maybe it'll kind of redeem itself from the last movie. Instead, it just seemed to be like we know we're making this for the money and we're sort of poking fun at that while trying to tell a new story. And when you do stuff like that, you just end up insulting the audience. Same is true with the recent Joker sequel, but that's a whole other story.
Well, and Saul as well, the Jigsaw series.
Yes.
I mean, well, but and then the remakes that some of these people make or the reboots, I just feel like it's not like it's out of control. you know?
Well, with the reboots and the remakes, their whole idea is not only, hey, we could reintroduce this successful movie to this new audience and try to recapture lightning in a bottle, but it's this idea that they think with today's technology, oh, we can make it better than we did back in the 80s or the 70s. And it's like you don't have the talent level to pull that off. And there's some exceptions. There are actually some decent remakes. Can't think of it off the top of my head right now, but there are a few. I'm sure people listening can leave it in the comments. But in a lot of cases, there are a lot of films that just simply, again, they use the name and then they follow the beats with the original and they think they got all this cool stuff. And it just, the talent level isn't there. The stories tend to be soulless. There's no original thought put into them. If you go back to, again, going back to the 80s here, John Carpenter's The Thing, which was the remake of the Howard Hawks movie. And the Howard Hawks movie was based on a short story, which they deviated from because in the original short story, Who Goes There, it's supposed to be this shape shifting alien that could take any form. in that movie they made it like a Frankenstein monster that's chasing after this science crew. And Carpenter said, okay, if I'm going to remake this, I want to go back to the short story. I want to use the creature from that. And he made an amazing film that used some of the most amazing practical makeup effects, stop motion effects, and animatronics that still hold up to this day.
Yeah.
Or even a film like Scarface, again, another movie that started as a Howard Hawks movie, and then Brian De Palma takes it and says, let's update the story to 1980s Miami, make him a Cuban, keep the same story beats, but you have a modern political context around it that makes it memorable along with the talent that's involved. You don't have that now.
No, exactly. I mean, Carpenter is a great filmmaker. I will give him that. And I think he co-wrote the new Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills. I did he do that, or was I am I just
Well, I know he did the music and he may have been a producer on them, but I don't know how much of a hand he had on the stories, especially the last one.
what did you think of the last one?
Oh, it was horrible. It just completely went into this like it was like a fork in the road and it went into a serious detour that made no sense with this Corey character. And you don't have this kid set up right from the beginning. And now we're like trying to make him a central figure. It's like it's too late for that. That's
Yeah,
what the audience wants.
it was bizarre. I mean, I liked it because it felt like a different movie, but then it also felt like Halloween 4. Because remember when Jamie touched Michael's hand and she stabbed her stepmother or something at the end of the fourth film? It was kind of like that because like he met Michael in the sewers or in a cave. I can't exactly remember where, and he became possessed in some way, shape, or form, and then took the role of killing Michael or killing, and everyone thought Michael Myers was around, but it was really Corey.
Yeah, I just think the bait and switch was probably something that everybody found jarring. I think they were expecting just a definitive conclusion with the characters already set up, and then to introduce this kid kind of like it threw everybody off.
And then the way they like killed him, like killed Michael, putting him in the wood chipper, that was the stupidest ending. Like if you really wanted to go back into the 70s and remake Halloween 1 or 2 and you really wanted to kill Michael off, that all you had to do is just throw him in a wood chipper. It would have been an easy an easy way to end the series. I mean, that's how they did it in the new remakes.
Yeah, this I even remember the what was it H2O where he had his head cut off, but then they undid that in the next movie where it's like, oh, it was an imposter that was in the mask, and then here's the real Michael Myers, and he kills Jamie Lee Curtis. They again, there's always like that stretching that they try to do.
When they also tried to do that in Halloween 2 when they made which personally one of my favorite movies. I feel like it's a standalone John Carpenter movie personally, but that was supposed to be an anthology series. But people wanted Michael back because they were like, "What? Where's he at?" You know.
Yeah, but I think people are starting to come around more to Halloween 3. I think they're starting to get it.
Well, and it really, if you watch the film, if you could see in every commercial that Tom Aiken's characters watch it whenever TV I can't speak, whenever he's watching TV, you see the Halloween commercial of him of Michael walking down the stairs, and Annie, she's the wife of his character in the film, in the third film.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, I didn't know that either until I looked it up. I was like, really? And then when you look at her, I'm like, oh, shit, that is Annie. She's just older and her hair's a little bit grayer. And then apparently, I think Jamie Lee Curtis is in the film, but it's just her voice. It's like a camo that you could hear. I don't remember where exactly in the film because I still can't find it.
Yeah, she's done that quite a bit. I know she did that in Escape from New York. She used her voice and in Escape from LA.
I never seen those films. I've always wanted to.
They're really good. It's some of Kurt Russell's best work.
So, like, is it basically Escape from New York is the first film, and then Escape from LA is the second film?
Yeah, so the Escape from New York is the one that came out in '81. That was the one where like New York has become a prison island in the future, and the president of the United States, his plane crashes on the island, so he's held hostage. They have to send this ex special forces soldier in Snake Plissken to go and rescue him, and they have a timer on his wrist that will explode if he doesn't finish the mission in a reasonable amount of time. It did well at the time, but it wasn't like a blockbuster hit. It was one of those movies that you found on video, and it became very popular. The sequel it's a continuation, but it's also technically like a remake because it follows the same plot beats and does the same idea of now LA is like a prison island, and now it's the president's daughter that's in jeopardy and they have to send Snake to rescue her. It's basically the same idea, similar characters, just one happens to have like more technology than the other.
Yeah, no, I was always interested in watching a movie like that, because I've heard a lot about it, and I just never gotten around to. The one film that used to scare me though, growing up as a kid, was Stephen King's It.
Yes, me too.
But like, did you ever see? Have you seen the old movie recently, like in the last year or so?
I saw the old movies actually right before It Chapter 2 came out.
What did you think about the old movie compared to the new one?
Well, I mean, obviously now because I'm older, it is a little bit on the cheesy side with the effects, but I still think if you have to hold them up together, I still prefer the original by far because of Tim Curry's performance, along with the original kids that played the Losers Club and the adults. I mean, I was huge fans of John Ritter and Harry Anderson and Tim Reed. They were like my heroes growing up because I was watching them on their shows every day. With the newer movies, I liked the first It because one thing I didn't know going in was that they were going to update the story to the 80s. So it was going to have sort of a Goonies and Stranger Things kind of vibe. And I loved that cast of kids that they assembled. Second one, I think, fell short. And I think that was always the case where when you get to the adult Losers Club story, it's not as strong, but here you could really see the flaws because they did pull away from a lot of what was in the book, as well as the fact that just the Pennywise design at the end. I wasn't too crazy about the CGI for that.
Yeah, I recently saw It Chapter 2 2 weeks ago. And I thought it was kind of violent in the beginning. I mean, with the two gay guys and what they were doing, I was like, "Whoa, this is like really like violent." Like even for Stephen King, I thought it was worse. But because I know Stephen King, like in his books, he's violent and very descriptive, from what I read. And I liked I liked this it better than the first one, to be honest. Um, just because growing up, I didn't understand the whole dynamic of the adults and then the kids. It was just confusing for me, and the adults, it just felt like they were dry and didn't really care, and you know what I mean. I just didn't like the acting, I guess you can say, in the first movie from 1990.
Yeah, I think with this one, they made more of an effort to really show how tortured they were as adults. Because I think in the original, they made it seem like, oh, yeah, everybody's successful and doing well. And then they just happen to get the phone call, and that's when they have to go back and deal with it. Here, everybody's successful, but you could still see, even before they get that call from Mike, something is off with each one of them. So I kind of like that part of it with the second chapter. Only thing I wish was that I was hoping for bigger names in that cast for the adults. Like I liked McAvoy. I thought Jessica Chastain and Bill Hader were perfect for their parts. But then it's like everybody else, I guess, because they ran out of money for the casting budget, they just had to go with people we didn't really know about for the other characters, especially for the heavy set kid that grows up to be the architect. I'm blanking on Ben.
But yeah.
Everybody said Chris Pratt should have played that part, and I guess they couldn't afford him, so they go with some nobody playing that. It's like that probably would be the only other role I would have put somebody of note in.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, who plays Richie? Is that Bill Hader?
Yeah, that's Bill Hader.
He was the only character I knew because I think he was on The Office, right?
No, he was
Not
he was
the
on Night Live, and then he's on the show Barry, but that was after it came out. I forget there was a show he did after Saturday Night Live, and I can't think of it right now.
Yeah, because I remember seeing. I could have swore it was. It may. Hey, I never saw The Office, but he looks like he would play the character on The Office. But no, he was the only character I knew. He was the only one I was like, wow, this guy's familiar. But everyone else, I really didn't know anything about their characters at all.
Yeah, I mean, but again, I think they made a really good effort, especially with doing more flashbacks in chapter 2. So the kids were still very much involved and you know who was who. That kind of helped, I think, for people that would have missed the kids to see them be used for like the flashbacks or like when their visions are all screwed up by Pennywise. So they were trying to do what they could. I just think that the first it was better than the second.
And that's usually the case with a lot of film, like a lot of sequel or not sequels, remakes. Like usually the first one's better. Like Halloween, John Carpenter's version was better. When Rob Zombie remade the film, wasn't really a fan of it because it just felt like it wasn't a Halloween film. It just felt like some guy, some kid who just was really deranged and was screwed up because he came from a screwed up family and he just went on a murder spree. And then same thing with Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, they followed the same aspect of the first one, and they had some of the same similar scenes where Freddy's coming out of the wall. But if you look at the 1980s version, there was really no CGI. You could literally see him come through a wall. Versus the 2010 film, you see the CGI of his whole body coming out and looking at what the hell's her name, Nancy,
Mhm.
in the film, which I didn't like either.
Yeah, no, that was just the magic of Wes Craven. He knew how to get the scares from people, and just the imagery of how he depicted Freddy Krueger in that first film before he became this joking mass murdering killer that everybody became a fan of. He was really dark, and you didn't really see him much other than in the shadows. So when he did visual effects, they were done to the fullest potential on such a small budget. Whereas you do it with a higher budget and CGI and the same, not the same like inspiration and innovation as what he did, it doesn't have the same effect.
Yeah. What did you ever see the movie Terrifier?
Yeah, actually saw the second one in the theater and I saw the first one on Tubi.
What did you think of it? Because I know a lot of people have hate. There's some people that have hate and some people that love it. I mean, I saw the first one last night. I wasn't a fan of the ending, but what were you? What was your thought on that movie series?
I'm mixed with Terrifier, and I'll tell you why. Because the guy who directed it is a Staten Islander, Damon Leone. I don't know him personally, although I do have friends that have crossed paths with him. And on one hand, it's like, hey, here's a guy from Staten Island who's a filmmaker, and he made it. He found something that works, and it's doing very well. So I got to tip my hat to him about that. Do I think it's scary? Not really. Do I think it's overly violent? Yeah, it goes for the shock value at every turn, and certainly to make it as disturbing as possible. That's why, like, when I saw the second movie, that was like a limited release, and not many people in the theater where I saw it at. So I can't say I'm like the biggest fan. Like I'm not like gonna rush to see Terrifier 3, but I do have an appreciation for that filmmaker and the fact that he was able to find something that's successful.
I don't get why people have passed out or vomited because I saw the first one last night, and I mean, yeah, it was really gory seeing the girl get gutted from bottom to top with a hacksaw. Like that didn't bother me at all. I mean, maybe it's just because I'm disturbed, but I didn't think there was a problem with the movie.
Yeah, no, I think it's just a modern audience now. I don't think they know how to handle that kind of level of gore that they're not used to seeing. Sure, you see movies where guys have their guts being removed or their brains being eaten in horror, but to the extent of like going at people's genitals or doing stuff that's just way out of the imagination is just something that I think this audience isn't taught to handle. Like, for people like me, that not only grew up on Nightmare on Elm Street Friday the 13th, but even like the smaller movies like Basket Case, that freaked me out as a kid. And that stuff was like very hard to take in. And now you look at it and it's just, you see how cheesy it was then. But this audience isn't used to that level of violence.
Yeah, so I was listening to Jim and Sam on Monday, and they had the director of Terrifier, and he was basically saying, like, yeah, the movie's very gory, but I'm making it a modern day Scream for this audience because in the '90s, that's what I think he believed. He grew up with Scream, so he wanted to make something different, kind of like Scream, but he put a clown in it who is a mass murderer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more along the lines of like a Halloween, but with a slight comedic edge to it that Halloween doesn't have. Um, Scream to me is more like just getting a bunch of teens together and they're all getting hacked up one by one, and it's your standard slasher thriller. And this one has more, especially the second one has like its supernatural elements. The heroine of the movie, who, spoiler alert, ends up being like sort of a quasi superhero at the end. It starts reaching into something close to like the third Nightmare on Elm Street, when you start to have the kids with the powers of the Dream Warriors. So it seems like they're kind of going into that direction. I consider Scream to be a little bit more grounded, even as absurd as the sequels got.
Speaking of Nightmare on Elm Street, did you think the third movie was like one of the best ones? Because that's a big argument in all horror movie franchises. Everyone says Dream Warriors best film ever.
Um, No, I mean, I'll say this. I think the original is the classic that still holds up because of the simplicity of the story and the way how deep it gets and how disturbing it is. But the third one is a lot of fun. And I've only seen it a few times in my life. And I can tell you that just between the cast, the special effects that Chuck Russell, who's the director, did, and he did the mask and the blob after that, and the fact that it really was, I think, the Freddy Krueger that we know of. That's where he was really in full display, like how fun of a character he became. That to me, I think, is like a fun third movie of any franchise. And then after that, they start to drop off a bit. I mean, I like four, but then five and Freddy's Dead, not so great. But that third one, yeah, I think it's tight, but I don't think it's a better movie than Nightmare One.
Fun fact: I interviewed Lisa Wilcox about a year or so ago on my show, and she was pretty cool. She was cool enough to give me a 30-minute interview.
Yeah, I actually had tried to reach out to her for my friend's podcast. She hadn't gotten back to us, but understandably, actors are busy. They got other jobs to do. And she was also somebody I had hoped they would bring back in one of the future sequels because it felt like her story was never really resolved after Nightmare 5. And, that's one of the reasons why I feel like while we still have Robert Englund, maybe we should get one more movie with him, bring back Heather Langenkamp, Lisa Wilcox, bring back all the survivors, and have them have one last stand with Freddy.
That's what I would do. I mean, I remember reading something that, and this is for one of the Halloween films, they wanted to make it like a multiverse of different Michaels from all different universes. And I was kind of thinking that's a bad move. Like, I know the multiverse was a big thing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but like, why have four different Michaels? Because there's four or five different timelines. Why have all four of those Michaels come together in one film? I just thought it was a stupid aspect for that that they were thinking in the beginning before they did the 2018 Halloween. And actually, I think it was after that. It was maybe Halloween Kills or Halloween Ends. They were thinking about that. If I'm correct.
Yeah, that really wouldn't work because there's just no distinction between the Michaels other than the actors who played him.
Yeah,
And on top of that, I think quite honestly, even though like Deadpool Wolverine did very well, I think people are getting kind of tired of the multiverse angle because there's no stakes in them. Kill off a character, they could just have their variant pop up. And we've seen Marvel try to do it, and it's been kind of a mixed bag so far. DC attempted to do with the Flash, and it failed miserably. So I think that's something that at a certain point, now that we kind of know where for Marvel where they're going to end up with the multiverse saga, they're going to eventually close the book on it and not return to it. And I think even other studios that might be considering that idea are going to probably start to pull back and maybe just do either individualized movies or maybe just go back to the whole like it's one whole universe and we're just going to stick to that. We're not going to go beyond it.
Yeah, what do you think about Robert Downey Jr. being Doctor Doom?
I'm mixed on that one too, like a lot of fans are, because I feel on one hand, it's kind of a genius move because it brings him back into the MCU. Maybe there's a potential he comes back as Iron Man, but they're just not saying it yet. And perhaps they could say, well, this is maybe Tony Stark in another universe where his life went a different direction and he became Doctor Doom. That could be interesting to see. On the other hand, it feels like it's desperation because there are so many really good actors that could play Doctor Doom, but you go back to him because you know outside of Deadpool, Wolverine, and Spider-Man: No Way Home, the movies have not been doing as well as they should be doing. And so this seems like a desperate tactic to boost box office and to boost interest. And I don't know, it just feels like I'm curious to see how they play it out. But on the other hand, it just feels like it's desperation to save the MCU. And I don't know if it's going to help it long term.
Yeah, I kind of wish they have somebody like I kind of wish they had like a different actor, and just because I don't know, it kind of feels like a soap opera in that like respect because every time a character would die in a soap opera, they would bring that character back as a different character, and it was like as the world turns, they made a series or they made a storyline where there was a mass killer killing kids at a summer camp, and I remember watching it with my mom. They killed this guy, and then after the show, the actor's like, "Hey, you know, I play so and so. My character was killed off, but I'm coming back in later episodes as a different character. So I'll see you guys in a few months or whatever." It's kind of like that.
Yeah, Marvel does it. Fast and Furious has been doing it. It presents no stakes. It just keeps everything in sort of this and I know these are movies and I know they're fictional, but you know, some of the best movies ever made are the ones where they break your heart when somebody has to go. You know, you when you watch the Godfather films, you know, you have members of the Corleone family dying in Godfather 1 and Godfather 2. When you get to the third one, which I know was not a particularly well received film, you could feel the loss. You could feel the void. Same thing with Rocky. Rocky Balboa, with him dealing with the loss of Adrian off screen and spending the entire movie going through that grief. And the only reason he's fighting is to reconnect with his son and to get over that grief. There's something to be said there that penetrates the heart of an audience member who's had to deal with loss and the struggle of having to move on from it. And even when I watch it, I get misty eyed every time he's going to Adrian's grave or going to all the sites where he used to date her. And, you know, you really feel that pain and the loss. With the Marvel movies and the other ones, you don't feel it as much because I could watch Endgame and be like, okay, you know, you kill off Iron Man, but it's Marvel. You're going to find some loophole to bring him back. You just set up a multiverse where you could pick this guy out from a different timeline and then bring him back if you're in really big trouble. Like, there's nothing stopping you from it.
Yeah,
Where's the stakes there?
yeah, exactly. It's just crazy, but I mean, that's Hollywood for you.
Yeah, and you know that's why like with our trilogy, I basically said no, this is the last one. I mean, yeah, you could probably stretch this into more films, but as far as I'm concerned, it's like let's do this now while we're still young and healthy and still able to do this because you never know what where things could be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. If we want to explore it again, you know, we've talked about maybe a series, but done in like an animated style of like little backstories of the characters. But that's something that's like very early talks, nothing serious yet. But that's the only thing I would see myself doing beyond this film.
There was a film director. He made a movie called Delco the movie, and it features three characters. It's kind of like a John Hughes type film. That's how I got the inspiration. I asked him if he would ever make a sequel to this movie. He said no, but I would do a sequel, but with a different character, like a minor character in the movie, and then put that into their story. So, would you ever do something like that? Like, say if you have a minor character that you didn't kill off, would you implement a storyline for that character and just put him in his own different standalone film?
That's a very good question because over the course of the three Vendetta films, we've had a number of side characters, and there had been times where I considered certain characters. I'm not going to say who, but some of them for potential spin-offs, where we would deal with their personal life or other cases that they're working on. So that has been something we've considered, although I haven't really decided if I'm going to go that route yet. But you never know. In the future, maybe I decide we could do another angle. Maybe one of the characters comes back to sort of bridge the gap, but it would just be focused on these new characters and their situation. And maybe things in the past can be addressed. That might be one avenue I might go in, but I wouldn't like try to do again a four and a five and a six of this. Not unless they paid me well to do it.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel with whatever I would like when I film Pandemic. Like, I have a couple side characters that I could possibly make like a short series about them, but I kind of want to continue the story that I made. Like, I have so much more to the story that I want to make, and it's just like I don't have time, and it's like trying to get people to get together. You know what I mean? So eventually, maybe I'll pick it back up for another another season if I want to, but that's a YouTube thing for me. But
But yeah, it's definitely for me. It's been a hell of a journey with these films, and I feel that you know none of them were ever easy to make. Even though this last one went pretty smoothly, post production would have its own challenges, but that's a whole other story. But I definitely feel like over the time, I really developed a lot of good relationships with the actors, especially Chris and JR, and some of the new people that we work with, like Mako San, who plays the villain. Malibu Slim plays one of the FBI characters. He's also producer on the project. Melissa Gatia, she plays, the new romance for the lead character. So like all these people that I've really, gotten acquainted with over time have really been beneficial to the overall story, the overall arc. And everybody put in their full effort, which I really do appreciate.
yeah, no, that's awesome though. So the Last Vendetta comes out November 9th. Where's it going to be distributed at?
Well, we're still in talks with a couple of distributors as we speak, but I would say definitely expect it sometime next year on the streaming platforms.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, no, and then the trailer's on YouTube as well. You can check that out as well. And you have anything else you want to plug before we get out here and take a quick break?
Yeah, if you want to buy merchandise before the premiere, we have a Printify store. Go to ajepixproductions.com. You'll be able to find the link there. We're selling like t-shirts, coffee mugs. We have our own coffee brand. We also have posters available if you want to buy them. Um, and also my link tree if you want to check out my older films. Link.tree at AJEPYX. That's on my Instagram as well at AJEPYX if you want to check that out.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you for coming on again. I mean, like I said last week, I had a little bit of a thing going on, so we got this going right now.
Yeah, no, it's always a pleasure, TJ. Thank you so much for having me on again.
Thank you for coming on, and we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a few moments. All right, that was Andre Joseph. All right, so that's going to wrap up today's show. Unfortunately, like I said, Phillies lost, and a little upset about that, but that's a different story for a different day. All right, so I'm done for today. Hope you guys have a good night, good day, And yeah, I'll see you guys later. So love you all to death. Make sure you follow on Spotify, Google Podcasts, A3 Media, TJTV. Check out first time caller, long time, first time, long time. I think, yeah, first time caller, long time listener on A3 Media, as well as my friend Colin. He has a show. It's all sports. So if you want to check that out, please do. It's a good show. I've listened to it multiple times. There's some pretty good guests on there too. So that should be fun. I'll probably be back in a couple days. I don't know. Like I said, I have a lot of stuff going on, and I'll talk more about that later. And yeah. All right. I'll see you guys later, and